Welcome everybody to our part 2 of electrification and etherization Q&A discussion format, in which we will address the more advanced aspects of spiritual thinking and feeling and being. Yes, welcome for all of you who are here live. My name is Jona Bryndis, you know me, and we're already like 2.5 hours in with the discussion about what all these spiritual concepts or how they can serve us, how we can reconcile the duality in ourselves, which is basically the battle between the material, the 3D experience of this life, and the spiritual experience of this life as a soul self. A soul self that is on the way of individuating itself. In other words, developing a spiritual identity. So these are all esoteric concepts that we need to understand before we can enter into the discussion of etherization and electrification. I did mention in part 1 that we can regard in a very simplistic way etherization as part of the concept of our soul's evolutionary path, and electrification as the concepts of the devolutionary part of our soul's path. They exist simultaneously and have become very visible in our time. Yeah, perhaps actually for the first time we'll investigate this. I hope that you guys come with a lot of questions. Why? Because we already understand that the spiritual impulse in us is the one that not only leads us to what we call awakening nowadays, but also to the development of our soul. And today I would like to look a little deeper into how that actually happens and why, well, questioning and asking questions, actually changing the questions, is so instrumental rather than seeking answers. Yeah, so I'm very curious about your take on this. Yeah, so if we look at what the spiritual impulse in us has done, or has not done for us, but has made us do, yeah, has inspired us to do, yeah, to change perhaps, yeah, then we might become a little more aware of our inner experience of this so-called soul self in us, this spirit being, yeah, that resides in us, that is having a physical experience. So in short, the spiritual impulse is the impulse from a higher power. We call it higher power because it does not, or is not explainable from any of our 3D material external environmental factors. It comes from within. It's an inside job, and therefore, cannot really be pinpointed as something that, somebody or something did to us. It is something that happens in mostly all humans. And as this occurs, which we get to here in a moment, because this was basically our takeaway from part 1, there is a new understanding. Yeah, so each time we gain more consciousness about ourselves, our lives, who we are, where we come from, where we're going, what our purpose is, we will gain a new perspective, a new vantage point on, the everyday life, but also the spiritual life's conceptions. And therefore, our perception changes each time. So we talked a little bit about this last time, that it sometimes feels like we've lived many different lifetimes in this one life, but we have not quite yet fully made that connection that we may have lived actual lifetimes. Okay, so this is something that I also want to go into, the role of karma, the topic of reincarnation, where are we going after death? So all these questions about the afterlife, but also we cannot leave that out. Where did we come from? So if we do believe in reincarnation, or if we believe in incarnation, that we are spirit being that is having a physical experience, we must have come from somewhere, and that must have been the spirit realm. All right, and that's most likely, I'm just going to put this up here as a thesis, where we're going to go after we had our physical experience. And then what? So we're going to dive a little deeper into this. I don't know if we get to this here within this discussion, but it is important to investigate the different stages of our spiritual awakening or of our consciousness development. And then we can go a step further and look into the history of conscious development for the entire collective, the entire human species. And then lastly, asking questions about the afterlife. All right, just real quick technical here. Linda says that you guys lost my voice. Can you guys hear me? Oh, okay. All right, you're back. Wonderful. Oh yeah, it was you. It's possible. Yeah, should I drop out or whatever, please let me know, guys, immediately in the text here, because sometimes the chat still works, even if the internet is too fickle to handle the audio or video. All right, let's look at what we came up with as the takeaways from part 1. The spiritual impulse in me. So it is natural that we relate, these discussions to our own life, to our own experience at first. And that's why I cut it a little shorter in the public video, because we did go through 1.5 hours of just sort of exchanging and sharing, how this went for us, and what we are trying to tackle, and our progress and so forth. And that's all very important. But I do not want to go into this any further. This is not the place for it. This discussion is not about how hard it was or what caused you issues in this physical life. All right, this is about understanding the bigger picture here in conjunction with our society, in conjunction with perhaps also our future. Why do I want to talk about the future? Well, it's simple. If we talk about afterlife, what comes after this life, well, we're talking about future. And by the way, that is also one of the logical proofs that we are not a machine, that we are not material only, because machines don't worry about their future. That is only something a living being, an organism, can do. And we as humans are very, very good at this. In fact, if you think about it, most of your issues are all about the future. That they are about, what is going to happen, or what if, or, how can I improve things for the future? So it's really all about, well, if we are just at the beginning of our consciousness development, our near future. Yeah, what is about tomorrow and what about in 10 years from now? But if we become a little more conscious, we expand that question into what happens after this life. Yeah, what do I get to take with me? What am I shedding? What am I leaving behind? Etc. So these spiritual impulses that we can feel within ourselves, they are separate from our experiences with trying to integrate them. So we did come up with a pretty impressive list here last time. Yeah, of the things that we experience as a spiritual impulse within ourselves. Yeah, let me just read this here real quick. You can all see this on your screen. I feel that there is more than just my material physical being that is having a material experience. All right, so that's the understanding that, there's some kind of soul, some kind of immaterial, yeah, like not bound to the material aspect to us. That's typically sort of the first onset of, pondering about spiritual questions. Spiritual questions being, purpose, peace, happiness, love, abundance, healing. I feel the impulse for striving for spiritual goals in life. So that's the next thing after we realize, well, wait, there's a part of me that doesn't seem to be bound to the physical, that continues on. And maybe it's a good idea if I, nurture that, if I work with that. Let me see a hand sign here from those of you here right now. I know one of you said this at the end of part 1 already. What does this feel like to you to talk about spiritual goals, spiritual striving? Do you feel that that's just sort of a mental exercise, or does it do something in you? Does it make you hungry for more? Who of you experiences the exchange of spiritual goals and spiritual issues as something that perhaps nourishes you on some level, that makes you want to have more? Give me a hand sign here. Do you feel this? Or is it more just an intellectual or conceptual curiosity? This is also okay. It's not that you have to feel it, but I'm curious. Who of you experiences this as a hunger, yeah, for more of this information, for a better understanding of things, not any particular view or dogma, but just like how these things work. Yeah, so that's good. Half of you, at least half of you, raise their hands. I can raise my hand as well, because this is how I got, to study all this, how I got to investigate all this. A really, really deep hunger, okay, for wanting to understand, like a curiosity. But more than that, as a scientist, I'm also curious about other things that are not necessarily spiritual in nature. So I can distinguish that within myself. When I talk about spiritual views, when I talk about how I see things working, when I watch things, be it, in the etheric or astral, it fills me up. It gives me some sense of fulfillment. When I watch the world, when I watch other people, and sometimes even myself getting caught in my ego, it doesn't do that. I mean, there's a curiosity about how the ego works, but it gets old after a while. Yeah, so I just want to like put a few more feeling descriptors here to this spiritual experience, yeah, of yearning for more, and also send the impulse to you along with this already. So developing spiritual impulse in you, that what you are feeling is basically your spiritual organs screaming for nourishment. They want to be nurtured. They want to be trained. They want to be exercised. They want to have food. You could say it's your soul asking you to feed it. Yeah. So if you've ever wondered why the hell you're so interested in all this spiritual stuff, and that's because your soul wants it. The spirit being in you wants it. Yeah. It nurtures it. So what happens when we feed this hunger, this spiritual hunger in us? Well, on one hand, it allows us to understand things better, to allow ourselves to see the bigger picture, to get a better feel for ourselves, who we are, where we come from, where we're going, what the purpose is, and so forth. For many of us, the investigation of those spiritual topics in and about life also lead to a higher level of expression, yeah, a higher level of vocabulary. There are many, many thousands of books written about spirituality. As a matter of fact, in historical literature, it's probably the most consistent kind of literature is about spiritual matters. Yeah, so you're not the only one. Yeah, you have this in common with all humans. Not everybody gets into the place where they can express this eloquently, but many have tried, and many will continue to write and to share, their spiritual experiences. And there's something in that, yeah, in that expanding of our spiritual lexicon, not just on an intellectual level, like learning another language, but also what it opens up for us. So when we nurture our spiritual organs, yeah, that appear to grow with this food, with the soul food, okay, something else happens. We begin to develop a sense for truth. We begin to develop the ability to discern what we know is true and what we think is true. So, a big part, if you look at your own life, of the confusions in life, that has to do with decision making, yeah, making the right choices. And every time we grow, every time we develop our consciousness, we can look back and say, oh, yeah, that was a wise choice. That was not such a wise choice, etc. So we can see truth more clearly. So what we thought was the right thing or the true thing at a certain time in life turned out not to be true or not to be that important as we thought, and so forth. So this is a sense that is developed through our spiritual organs, guys, not through the development of our intellect. Our intellect has a limitation. Yeah, so obviously we can feed our intellect like an AI with lots of information. But the decision-making process will always depend on, well, the amount of information, where the information came from. Yeah, like the perspectives this information have. But knowing truth has nothing to do with information. Knowing truth comes from within. And that then allows us to express ourselves more congruently. By the way, those are all takeaways that you listed at the end of part 1. I recognize that I need to remind myself of my spiritual nature more often. This is like a schism in us that we discovered early on, that we all believe we are like a soul self that's having this physical experience, and yet most of our decisions, most of our life derives around material decisions only. A simple question: how many times alive do you actually contact your soul self, talk to your higher self, or something like that? Made us become aware that we forget that we're actually a spirit being. All right, so decision making has a lot to do with our ability to feel truth, but also with our connection, with this part in us, this higher self / soul self. Okay, so we're assuming that our soul self is a higher self, higher in relation to our ego self. That we forget that it's right there. I realize to overcome the split between my material and spiritual reality, I need to care more for my spirit life. That's the nurturing aspect. That's the, asking questions, engaging in meditation, prayer, contemplation, pondering, these more spiritual aspects in life. I see sense in training the shifting of my perspective. That's something that you guys pointed out is a big one. That every time you allow yourself to shift your perspective, your perception changes with it, and a whole new view, a whole new world opens up. The question is, now, how do we deal with this new view? It's the reason why I give this disclaimer here at the beginning of this advanced spiritual discussion, because if you don't want to discuss uncomfortable topics such as the afterlife, or what are the dark forces, the adversarial forces that work against our spiritual evolution process and so forth, then this is not for you. So you can shift your perspective, open up a new view, but then you're going to have to enter that new perspective with your new perception and begin to learn, to read the map, to navigate it. And this is a schism that many of us have. We all want to be spiritually enlightened, but we don't actually know how to navigate the spiritual realm. In fact, we never even bother to inform ourselves about this. And instead, and this is something that some of us have already experienced, we run into danger to get caught in these rabbit holes, in this sort of unknown territory. That's why, my plea always is to do this systematically and fully conscious. I want to allow myself to be more curious and ask more questions about my true being. So to actually build this bridge and walk this bridge from the material to the spiritual, we have to ask questions. We've already come to that conclusion, but then we also need to be willing, to have the courage to ask questions about our true being, this soul self that we are. I feel the need for more compassion for my or our human condition. So that's then a bit of an advanced state, where we realize, oh, this is how this goes, and this is why I'm here, and that's why I'm experiencing trauma and adversity, and this is what my struggle is telling me. This is what it's all about. We can only get there when we can let go of our inner duality, of the judging and the questioning our spiritual identity. And then lastly, I want to find out how to muster the courage to overcome the adversities of human life. The question or the topic that has kept us busy, us as a human species, ever since we can consciously think. How can we better deal with the 3D reality? And so many other questions. Now, there are some other impulses. And I wanted to ask you here present what you see as part of the spiritual impulses in society, the good and the bad. What do you see? We talked a little bit about this last time. We did recognize that it is much easier to talk about certain things, but that it has also become harder to talk about certain things. And I want to discuss your observations here as to what you see in our society. Where do you see the spiritual development go right now? What are some of your observations? I've pointed out a few of them that we worked out last time. We are driven to see ourselves material only. All right, this has to do with consumerism. This has to do with, sort of how our health system, our medical system, and even our legal system defines what it means to be human. It's defined by its material aliveness or functioning. Yeah, it's defined as brain waves in the legal sense, also mostly in the medical sense, which fundamentally is a material energy, a physical energy. We're also being told that we are created out of the material. Yeah, so when we think of how does life come into existence, we talk about our mother and our father and the egg and the sperm and all that. Really, all we describe that way is the mechanism, yeah, how, the cell begins to divide, etc., and develop. We're not describing why and where that impulse to create life originally came from. In order to answer that, we also have to define what is life. Is it just the cells, the atoms? Yeah, or is there something more? We've become lazy in that we no longer ponder about the afterlife. That's a phenomenon that you can observe in our societies nowadays, especially coming out of a pandemic, where it was all just about the physical. And yes, it's understandable when there's a threat to the physical, we do tend to fixate on that. But there are other aspects to that. That when we did the COVID webinar, some of you actually pointed out and wanted to discuss, which I thought was really cool. We have become reluctant to talk about higher power. Most people have something like what psychology calls a religious trauma, at least here in our Western world, and no longer or refuse to, talk in the ways that would allow us to contextualize some of these tricky things in life, the things that can explain maybe why somebody experiences something or what the purpose of things are. This has a lot to do with our relationship with higher power. Just to give you an example here, God's mysterious ways. Of course, it's a little superficial to just call everything God's mysterious ways, but it does help the psyche. All right, we don't do this anymore. Those are just a few things that we've already worked out. I stopped here because I want to hear a little more from you, what you are observing. And it can be anything that you're observing that shows you how the topic spirituality, yeah, and the spiritual self is being handled in our society. What are some of the things that you observe? Maybe not topics, but what are your observations? What can you see how people handle their spiritual yearning, their spiritual impulse? And again, here, remember that we are talking about the bigger developments. We're not talking about individuals. We're talking about humanity. Talking about the masses. Oops, Cindy, I see your mic is open, but I can't hear you. Are you saying anything?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you now.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I think I was partially unplugged. So my thought is, even though there's a lot of darkness out there, the impulse in society is strong. I think people are looking for something because spirituality, like we were talking about in the marathon webinar, has been hijacked in every way possible. I think people are looking for meaning. They're perverting it a bit, like New Age, and kind of suiting it to, whatever maybe their ego needs are. But I think that deeper impulse is there. That's just my thought on that.
You think it's more or stronger today than it was, let's say, 50 years ago?
I think so, because we are faced with all of these things that we weren't faced with 50 years ago.
Such as?
And, well, pandemic for one. Yeah, they had pandemics 100 years ago, but the way technology has electrified us as part of this training is the way we are disconnected and more connected. It's like just life itself is a schism, and we're looking for something with more meaning. Technology is not bringing us this meaning. I can't really explain it better than that. Is that making any sense? Yeah. So
my notes here about what you said is technology is disconnecting us more.
Yeah, I definitely. And these forces that are working through us are pinging us, how shall we say, for that evolution within us as well.
Yeah, that that one we want to discuss here. What these impulses are that are working through us, how they work through us, and where they lead us, so that we can make more informed or more educated or more congruent decisions in life.
Yes.
Right? But let's just collect observations.
Yes.
like a true scientist? What are we observing in our societies? So technology plays a big role. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah. So we have, on one hand, we feel the disconnect through technology moving deeper and deeper into our personal lives. Used to be just a work thing, right? I'm old enough to remember this. You know, like 45 years ago, 50, 40 years ago, computers and such were like a work thing. And now it's a very personal thing, and in some people's cases, actually a very intimate thing. But on the other hand, we also see a stronger seeking today than maybe 40, 50 years ago. Let's keep collecting our observation. What else do you guys observe in our societies in regard to spirituality, or that affects our spirituality?
Oh, can I say something here? Or can I share?
Hi, Mindy.
Hi. Yeah, Jona, I'm finding finding it quite challenging where it's either superficial talk or else it's these paid for packages of experiences. I think like what Cindy was saying, where it's the new age type, wrap it up and put a price on it and play on people's trauma and stuff, which I find I'm finding it kind of repulsive because I guess I've fallen for that enough myself. I'm feeling a little alone maybe in it, in that everybody's going either all or nothing. Maybe, I don't know.
I'm writing down notes as you guys speak. So I wrote down, this is more like a note to myself. I don't know if you guys understand, is that new age transfiguration. And then I was gonna write misinformation. So what I hear you referring to is that there is like a big impulse there to investigate spiritual things. But how did you call this? Packaged experience? A packaged
Oh,
experience.
I think
Uh-huh.
what I mean is
I
I'm
like that.
finding I'm finding it hard to discern between what's really genuine offerings on guidance out there, like your beautiful offerings and other people that are doing similar things that are helpful and true and beneficial, versus those that are just packaging something up for the sake of preying almost on, I wouldn't say preying on it, but just the fact that everybody's purging and clearing and wanting to heal things. So it's quite easy to get sucked in, I guess, to the marketing ploy behind a lot of things.
All
And
right,
I'm just finding,
that in and of itself is a materialization of spirituality, right? So that's what you're observing, that among certain circles or in certain parts of the population, yeah, that there's you know, a strong sort of desire or seeking for healing, but that, you
yeah,
know, that there's lots of groups that take advantage of that.
yeah, I hear it, and yeah, but I know there's a lot of goodness out there in those offerings, but I'm finding it's all or nothing. It's almost like there's nothing genuine, like that genuine connection of interacting. It's almost like the opportunity I don't feel is quite as easily available anymore to connect with like-minded people just on a platonic, I don't know the right word, like on a level of just connection and not expecting it to be a whole workshop type package or something for sale versus just normal superficial talk. I don't know. That's just
Spiritual
my experience at the
consumerism?
moment.
How about that? It's a
Pardon?
bit like that. Spiritual consumerism?
Yes, exactly.
Does
Thank
that
you.
fit?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So I hear what you're saying, and this is something that many of us who are a little older have, you know, can easily become aware of because we've been, you know, around this corner a few times. There is the aspect of misinformation is actually my bigger concern than the you know, like the packaging and stuff like that, because we cannot forget that everybody's at a different stage and needs you know, different ways, different pathways to find to themselves and to find to healing. You know what I mean? Like, that's a matter of opinion, really. You know, what works better for a person, and we really have to experience it to know what works well for us. Do you know what I mean? Just because it works well for us doesn't mean it works for others, and just because it doesn't work for us that well doesn't mean that it's, you know, some kind of you know, materialist agenda. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, just to stay fair, just to stay neutral here. But I do agree with the fact that there are some what I call transfigurations. That's a sort of a twisting of things, a twisting of information, all right, that perhaps, for example, promotes dependency, or that promotes trauma. You said something about taking advantage of trauma, taking advantage of some of these like really blurry spiritual realms that people cannot navigate themselves yet. Yeah, which also make them prey. So I think the word prey is not wrong in this context. It's the reason why we're here, right? So that we're no longer susceptible to this, so that we are no longer just like a sitting duck, but that we actively, or learn how to actively step into this, so that we can begin to navigate these spiritual realms ourselves. Yeah, after all, it's about gaining a spiritual identity. This means, you know, in different words, still esoteric words, but it means to actually develop something like a spiritual authority. Yeah, to develop the I, the awareness that I exist, the awareness that I have a soul. And because this is new for most people, now there's also a lot of misuse of that. Now, in many of these, what we now regard as critical, or perhaps, you know, money-making schemes in the New Age, do have a kernel of truth. So let's not forget that. And I don't know, maybe I can get a hand sign from you guys who, if you went through some of those New Agey, you know, perhaps packaged experiences, as Mandy called it. Yeah, myself included. All right. And yet we're here. Maybe that was something that we had to go through to learn for ourselves. Those of you who raised their hands, what would you say? Would you want to miss those experiences, even if they were bad experiences? What have you learned from those New Age experiences to date?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't take them back. That's for sure. They've been invaluable to me. You know, there's little kernels, like you said, of things that you learn that are little nuggets of gold, maybe, that you can use. And then a lot of it's about, for me anyway, has been about learning what not to be, what not to do,
Yeah,
and, you know, what to
yeah,
avoid.
yeah. Isn't that how we grow? Isn't that how we evolve? And don't get me wrong here. You know, I'm an outspoken critic of, you know, some of the most prevalent New Age theories and conspiracies out there. But at the same time, I'm also teaching spirituality. I'm guiding people through this. So there's got to be something here that even when a person makes a negative experience, that they're being confronted with, that has to do with, you know, how their inner workings are. Now, there's some people who will never fall for any of those things, and they'll people, they will always fall for it. That in and of itself is also something to consider. We may not be able to answer this fully yet because, most of us feel like we have a good grip on maybe some of these esoteric concepts, but don't actually have our own personal experience with it yet. So until you have your own personal experience where you can say, I know God, I know my guardian angel, I know Jesus, I know love, I know truth. Well, people can tell you anything. Isn't that how it goes anyway in life? So this is what I mean with content, or have more compassion for a human condition. We gotta accept that, that's part of what we gotta work with. That's what we have. Yeah, and if it turns out that we don't have the inner ability to discern truth, that we cannot feel, for example, when something isn't true, or worse and more prevalent, that we feel when something isn't true but don't act on it. Who of you, look, hang on, let me lower your hands. Who of you feels when something is off, or felt when something was off, and yet did it anyway? Yep. Thank you guys for being so honest. Now, this is the duality in us. That's the schism that we need to overcome, that we need to work with. That is what walking the bridge means. We know that we have spiritual authority, when we can do this, when we can feel this, when we know what God and love and truth and peace and abundance is. In that moment, nobody can come and tell you, oh, you got to wear white robes and become a vegan and, sing a certain song that you don't even understand what the words mean in order to get enlightened. Yeah? Or somebody comes along and says, oh, you have to take this experimental gene-altering drug in order to survive your life. No pun intended here, but this is the kind of stuff, okay, that we're looking at when we're looking at spiritual investigation. The only way for us to actually tell if something is true is through our inner experience of it. And so we're looking at a process here. The spiritual impulse comes to us in two ways. In one way, in form of curiosity, and sort of delivering a ping, a poke to our consciousness. Says, oh, ask these questions. Why is this? Why is this? How come? What does this do? Why did I do this, even though I wanted to do this? And the other impulse comes through our heart. And one comes through our consciousness soul, and the other one comes through our feeling soul. Why is this so hard? Why is this so difficult? What am I resisting here? What am I not seeing? And these two impulses, they need to be followed up on. We've already came to the conclusion that, studying spirituality doesn't really do much. It may help us to understand, just like nature science, the mechanics of some things, but it doesn't really deliver us with a true nurturing. It's more like fast food for the soul. Can you guys follow me? That's so spiritual consumption is like fast food for the soul. You want things that make you feel good. Now, as we are there with spiritual consumerism or spiritual consumption, let me ask you, what are some of these things that make you feel good spiritually, temporarily? What would you call as spiritual fast food?
Bliss states or bliss seeking only.
Yeah, assuming that the spiritual path is a path of bliss and happiness. So all messages that sound somewhat reassuring or positive, they feel good. They do, but not for long. They only feel good for exactly as long as you stand in front of a very simple choice. What should I eat for dinner? Chocolate cake or some life-giving salads or healthy foods. Only for as long as you or until you are confronted with your own duality. So spiritual knowledge and spiritual messaging and stuff like that is not enough to overcome or to muster the courage to actually become it, to actually live it. On the other hand, this is also something that we can observe in society right now as a spiritual impulse. The seeking the shortcut through hallucinogenics, working with elemental forces. Why do I call this seeking the shortcut? And maybe you know other examples for spiritual shortcuts.
Because you're not actually having to do the work and put the time and the feeling in. It's something outside of you that you're putting in instead of the opposite.
Well, yeah, wanting to get it delivered, like an Amazon package, right?
Yeah, exactly. Spiritual Uber.
Well, we're not being sarcastic here. We're being, critical of some things, and mostly also things within ourselves, impulses within ourselves. So this investigation is very relevant, okay? Because we have to understand how we are bypassing the actual work a lot of times. This is also a term, it's called spiritual bypassing. Does anybody have examples for spiritual bypassing?
Can I ask a question about spiritual bypassing?
Oh, we're talking about it just right now.
Yeah, so would it be, for example, all this trauma release stuff that's out there now and trending, even for example, the euphoric breathwork movement, working with breathwork to help you purge and clear things, and then leaving people completely disjointed and I guess unintegrated after that. So they've kind of thought that they've purged 20 years of pain and trauma, but then they're actually left completely unhinged, whereas maybe a more sustainable daily practice would be more beneficial for them in the long run. But you do feel better. You do feel,
Relief.
yeah, relief, exactly. But like the shortcut, like you say, it's kind of like you're wanting to get to the end result quicker without doing the work, like Cindy said.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
Sometimes there's benefit in.
what you're describing is just bad practice. Okay. Yeah. So those are practitioners that don't really know what they're doing. Okay. If you understand healing as a spiritual modality, okay, so then you have to understand that healing consists of 3 major parts. One is the clearing. Another one is the integrating. Yeah. So clearing is always removing that which makes you sick or unwell. Yeah. Or like in physical terms, for example, the virus or the bacteria. Yeah? Remove it. Remove what causes the contamination. Then the integration. Yeah. Change your behaviors along with it. Right? That's not enough to just remove, to cut things out, to take things away that have been accumulated over time. You also have to change your behaviors. That's integration. Yeah. Identify how it got there, that you absorbed or that you accumulated, these aspects of unwellness. Okay, and change it. Do more exercise, eat better food, do more meditation, breathe more deeply, stretch more, pray more. Yeah, all these kind of things that we already know. Okay, that's integration. That's part of the work. But then there's another aspect of that, and that's something that many people forget. That if you're actually looking for spiritual answers, all right, you need to connect with the part in you that can give you answers. Your material ego self cannot give you those answers. It only lives this lifetime. It dies when you die, when your body dies. But your consciousness does not. So the connecting part is like, instead of just trying to, sterilize everything and put air filters everywhere and try to remove or prevent yourself from being exposed to germs, you work on strengthening your immune system. You work on strengthening the part in you that can actually do something about it. So, whether it's breath work or whatever kind of modality it is, if it's all just based on clearing, on that very first piece of a very long and complex healing process, namely relief, cutting things out or removing things or allowing things to purge, and there's nothing that happens after that, well, then that's bad practice. Because any healer should know that that's just the beginning of the healing process. If people don't change their behaviors, if they don't change their perspectives, and if they don't connect more with the part in them that actually does the healing, there's no healing possible. Okay, so you're criticizing a specific way how, some sort of healing fads, let's call it that way, operate. That's not exactly the same as spiritual bypassing. Because when somebody goes to somebody else, like a healer or somebody who says, I can show you ways to heal, that's like going to a doctor, right? So you expect that they can show you the way. And if they don't show you the way, or if they show you the wrong way, well, then they're bad practitioners. Okay, that doesn't mean that you are spiritually bypassing. It can, however, be part of the own self-deception by running from one healing fad to the next. So every 2-3 years they change. And just focus on cutting the things out and never ever wanting to look at yourself and what in you yeah, attracted or, you know, actually tethered yourself to these kind of things.
I think you hit the nail on the head there for me.
Yeah, that's spiritual bypassing. It's when you try to be spiritual, use spiritual practices, but don't do any spiritual work. Spiritual work is the questioning from within. And I hate to break it to all of you. I know most of you have heard me say this many times, so it's not a surprise. But there is no way to your higher self than through looking at your lower aspects. And it's almost like a natural barrier. Yeah, that's how your higher self protects itself from misuse. You cannot get to your higher self with spiritual consumption or bypassing or specialness or anything like that. It will not work. Now, this is different from criticizing practitioners and how they do their work. Okay, that's two different things. And I guess, you know, one of the phenomena is, you know, that is responsible for what you're saying, Mandy, is that there is a lot of fragmentation right now in regard to, you know, what healing is and what spirituality is, and, you know, the lingo around that. Yeah, there is no unified consensus about this. There's no, you know, path that everybody can take to get to the same results. Oh, so it appears that way. And part of that is because we're really just at the beginning of this. We're at the beginning of understanding that, well, we have something like a spiritual authority. Well, we have something like spiritual faculties. We have something like spiritual organs. Oh my God, we can do all these things. But everybody's using their own lingo, their own framework, mixing words and concepts and things together. Yeah, that's like as if somebody who went to, you know, to trade school to become a plumber, talks about spiritual stuff in a plumbing sense. Okay, not that sometimes that's actually a good analogy, but do you know what I mean? So really the problem that we're having is that we don't actually have good ways yet, good pathways. We don't have a spiritual science. We don't have a pathway that everybody, no matter where they're from, can take to get to this inner experience of their higher self and to learn all these healing ways along the way. And so be aware that this is a big part of today's confusion, spiritual confusion. Yes, that we don't have a unified lingo. We don't use the same terms. We have different streams of spirituality coming together at this point. Yeah, Eastern spiritual traditions and teachings, Persian spiritual teachings and traditions, Middle Eastern spiritual traditions and teachings, and Western spiritual traditions and teachings. And there is a total mumbo jumbo going on as far as, you know, what all these words mean. Do you guys know how many times people ask me, what's the difference between the soul self and the higher self? What's the difference between the divine and source and God? So it would be a lot easier for all of us if there was something like a, I can't call it universal lexicon, but at least something that we can all agree on. Because at the end of the day, it's an inner experience. It's a complex inner experience, no less complex than love, for example. Yeah. But at this point in time, we can clearly observe that there is sort of this tendency that everybody is sort of calling dips on words, including, you know, some other agendas that are coming in. I mean, the church has always done that, yeah, since 325 AD, yeah, to call dips on words, yeah, and to decide which information is being shared and which isn't. Okay, but we're at a point today where, you know, with all these different political streams and these, you know, sort of shadow powers, yeah, that are working through the physical, yeah, that words are not just being, you know, trademarked and you know, being sort of taken out of their origin or falsified. They're literally being hijacked or even worse, censored. Yeah, so this is something just to be aware of. It's quite difficult, even though there's more and more people talking about spiritual things. Yeah, just think of the word energy, for example. And even karma seems to be quite a normal word today. But if you ask, nobody can actually give you a consensus or like what it actually means. So there is no map right now. Now, in the old days, historically, how was this done historically, guys? When somebody felt the calling to walk the spiritual path, let's just sort of focus on our Western world. How did this go? And I count the Middle Eastern, the Hebrew traditions into the Western. If somebody wanted to devote their life to the spiritual path, how did this go in the old days?
They joined a convent or the clergy or whatever denomination their leaders or teachings were geared for.
Monastery or whatever. So you had to kind of,
yes,
you had to kind of you had to sacrifice your physical 3D material life, step out of it and step into like a different environment, sort of a closed system, yeah, in which you were free to study, to learn, to integrate, etc. What's your opinion on this? Do you think that's a good way of doing that? Not good or bad, but I mean, does it make sense to you why people in the old days had to go to the monastery or the convent or go through certain initiation ritual so that they could learn these things? These spiritual things.
It kind of does make sense in a way historically, because not everybody, I don't think the impulse was as strong back then to, you know, the collective consciousness wasn't at a level where everybody wanted to engage in those sort of practices. So, you know, and I guess that led to some more divisions and polarization of people and hidden knowledge and all that kind of stuff. But nowadays, it's the consciousness is higher, and now people are engaging in it in their 3D lives, in everyday life, to take a step into their lives and make it practical.
So that's kind of new, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
In the old days, it had to be protected. It was almost impossible, you know, to live a spiritual life, like a devoted spiritual life, right? While at the same time, I mean, there's some tradition, like the Buddhist tradition, you know, is very strong on the initiation rites, but then at the same time, a big part of that is to reintegrate into 3D life. Well, in Hebrew and Roman Catholic ways of the clergy, you never reintegrate. You talk to people from real life, but you never integrate. Okay, why? Because in order to gain or to attain spiritual knowledge and, you know, go through the initiation, you had to be free of those 3D worries in the old days. Yeah, you had to be able to just focus on that. You had to sit on a mountaintop for three days without having to worry about how to pay your bills, or, you know, engage in intense spiritual study over years, yeah, without, you know, feeling the conflict of, oh, I need to do something real with my life, or else my mommy or daddy won't respect me, or something like that. So you had to be taken, it had to be protected. You know, and you nailed it, Jared. The overall conscious level was lower. You know, those were times, you know, even if you just think 200, 300 years back, you know, where the human life actually didn't have a lot of value. Yeah, so if we, you know, once we start this spiritual investigation, we have to also put things into context with their time. Now, you said something very interesting here, Jared, namely that the conscious level now is high enough. I think that's what you said. For us, and this word us, I think would that mean, you mean like a larger group of the population? It used to be like very, very few people only that would decide to go to the monastery, to convent, and give up their 3D life. We are now at a point where, you know, normal people start asking those spiritual questions, and where the environment is such that we have the information accessible, which, by the way, also wasn't the case until 50 years ago. Yeah, so not only did people have to go into seclusion, the knowledge itself also had to be protected and kept secluded. In other words, esoterically. Yeah, only for a few, only for those who were mentally, physically, and emotionally prepared for spiritual initiation. And if you watch some of these movies, especially like the Chinese and so forth, you know, the Buddhist traditions and so forth, the preparation, yeah, to become spiritually initiated spanned over decades. Yeah? Who is willing to give up their life for decades just so that they're able to read one book? So on one hand, we have a larger group of the population, you know, I don't want to say the masses yet, but we have, you know, more and more people spiritually awakening and wanting, you know, to understand these spiritual things. But on the other hand, we don't have a pathway for that yet. And most people are not physically, emotionally, or mentally prepared. They enter the spiritual realms, many through these so-called shortcuts, without the needed development of these spiritual organs, which can be a big problem. Now there's a reason why one had to do all these disciplines and scrub the floors and humiliate oneself and all these kind of things for years. All right, to have a prepared enough mind to even be susceptible, yeah, to what this spiritual disclosure shows them. So most people nowadays are not prepared, yeah, and New Age has done pretty substantial misinformation there, namely by basically propagating that everybody can get there in a weekend. Everybody can get enlightened over a weekend. Do ayahuasca or, take some frog poison or, I don't know, starve yourself half to death or live off sun rays or, say 800 mantras a day or whatever. Eat vegan or whatever. It's the externalization, right? Where we, think that spiritual growth comes through getting, having, owning, reaching something. So let's just keep this list open, guys, as we go. I'm sure we'll find some more aspects that we can observe in our society that pertaining spirituality. Yeah, there are some more. But just for the sake of advancing our discussion here, let's just, remind ourselves that, when we step into the spiritual world, yeah, when we begin to develop a higher range of perception, if you will, yeah, from the physical, material, bodily perception only, which is reigned by instincts, really, biology, yeah? Lower impulses, animalistic impulses, to the emotional, psychological, which is, affecting our heart in ways, yeah, through emotions, through, which are, tied to the nervous system, tied to our neurotransmitters and hormones, also partially to, learned behavior. And then into the mental, the conceptualizing, the mindsets, if you will, yeah, the perspectives on life, on the world, into the spiritual. Okay, so we are developing from a denser, denser state, physical 3Ds, the denser state, the emotional, neurotransmitters, nervous system, still pretty dense. Yeah, that's where most of our trauma is located. Yeah, think of, your pain body and somatic issues, trauma memory in your cells, and etc. Yeah, and how it affects your emotions and your ability to act and feel and think freely. Yeah, then you get a sense for what I mean with density. That's really dense. Okay, it's not easy for you to see through that. The mental aspect of you, the intellectual, and where you have all your concepts, yeah, of how you contextualize the world and yourself, which is directly linked to your ego. That has a lot to do with how you grow up and what other people told you and how other people see you. It's very externalized up until the point when you spiritually awaken. When you spiritually awaken, it comes to you through asking new questions, questions outside of your mindset, outside of your current perspective. Yeah, it motivates you to be curious, and it motivates you to gather or collect or attain new experiences, experiences that speak in a different way. Yeah, it speaks to your spiritual heart, your sacred heart. Yeah, that's our feeling soul. And once you receive this impulse, you still have to work with those impulses until you become able to, well, put them into perspective and form something like a conscious self or an I am awareness, yeah, your spiritual identity. Yeah, recognizing yourself as a soul and not just sort of saying it to yourself, yes, I'm a soul with the being with the body. No, like literally feeling your soul, communing with it, being one with it, and understanding your own spiritual being. These are extremely big evolutionary steps in our human evolution. Now, once you begin to subscribe, to the idea that there is some kind of force that drives, this evolution forward, that is responsible for it, that has sort of a plan, okay? And even if all the plan says is constant growth, we can come to the conclusion that whatever is coming into materialization here in 3D, must have been conceived by our consciousness first, by our soul, and it's just coming into materialization here in 3D. So we're materializing, we're manifesting something here while we're in 3D. Why? Because it's dense here. We can materialize here. As a soul self, we cannot. So spirit beings cannot materialize in the 3D. But our soul can bring things into our consciousness, all right, that we then begin to manifest. In other words, everything that is manifested here in the 3D must have been conceived by a consciousness before it existed. Yeah? So as below or as above, so below, meaning, all right, so there must have been, maybe a higher hierarchy, okay, of beings, that thought this up. Yeah, well, in order for the human soul to develop, it needs to have a mechanism that we can call evolution, okay, to make it strive for constant growth. We describe evolution as the striving for the higher expression. Okay, can you guys follow me? Now, this is a mechanism, and we can observe this mechanism everywhere we look. In nature, in life, on the planet, the solar system, the galaxy, everywhere. There's a constant evolution, a constant striving for growth. There's a constant expansion. So the materialization of something is the outer expression of an inner process. Yeah? The material is the expression on a denser level of a less dense or spiritual process. And so we can continue to conclude that evolution is the process of existence, development, refinement, and growth of a being, that be us, human, expressed as continual cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth, life and decay. Those are esoteric concepts that we have to learn. This is the mental preparation for understanding spirituality. You have to understand these things. There's a certain level of logic okay, that needs to come in to build a good foundation for you to understand the bigger mechanisms in the universe. And so evolution is the process of existence, development, refinement, and growth of a being, expressed as continual cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. Also called life and decay. That seems to be a universal law. Now, if we have already taken the challenge to define ourselves as actual spirit beings, soul beings that are having a physical experience, this does not scare us too much. But if this is the first time we're hearing this in this manner, all right, then that's scary. Why is this scary for people?
Because it's the unknown and it's uncontrollable.
Yes, it's the unknown and it's uncontrollable for, let's be precise, for whom?
For those that are unconscious.
No, for the ego self. For the ego
For the
self, the
ego,
one
sorry.
that is tethered to the physical experience. That means that I would have to admit that there's a lot that I cannot control. Okay. Yep. And what else? Why else is this scary?
You have to admit that we're immortal, living a mortal life. The consciousness that's not mortal, to balance that every day.
We have to admit that the actual circle of life includes death. That's a part of it. It doesn't end there. It's just part of it. Just like, in nature awareness at our school, we teach kids, okay, we're building a seed bank right now with all the plants, vegetables, fruits, flowers that we grow at Master Tree Academy. We collect the seeds after the plant is, decayed or eaten or whatever, and have a library of them. And the kids can go there, and if they want to plant something at their house or whatever, they go there and pick, okay, sunflower seeds. Oh, okay, dill seeds. Oh, okay. All right. And they get this, guys. So 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds will get it, that the plant grows, 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 and grows, brings about the fruit, and then it brings the seed. And within the seed, everything about this organism is refed, back into the seed. So all it takes after the plant is decayed is to put the seed back out. It needs to find ways to put itself back out, with the right nourishing, with the right environment to reemerge, to resurrect, and so forth. Now, we have a little hard time with picturing this because we don't really create seed pods when we leave this planet, when our physical vehicle or physical body leaves this planet, or decays. How do we leave seeds in the world? How do we fulfill the circle of life?
In the way we connect with life and how we connect with the change.
After death.
Oh.
With our consciousness and through our children.
Yes, there's 2 ways. Point on, Jared. There's 2 ways. One is obviously the biological process, which is through our children. But our children only carry half of our genetic material and half of our impulses. So on the biological level, there's a continual evolution taking place. We are the product of this human evolution, via our ancestors on a pure physiological material level. Yeah, so every generation is a little bit of an upgrade to the previous generation. Hopefully, for as long as we are aligned to the evolutionary path. And the second way is through our consciousness. So how does this work? How do you picture this for yourself? How this works? That your, let's say your gathered experiences here somehow, I don't know, transfer or get collected somewhere? Or how do you picture this? Let's talk about this for a moment. How do you picture what happens after your physical death? Or if you were in the process of dying, or certain time after death, what happens with your consciousness?
I would think that it would, because all the experiences, the growth, the development, is clearly not stored in your brain. So when your physical body dies, consciousness needs to move on somewhere. So I would imagine that it becomes conscious of its etheric self first.
Say that again.
Most people, I would imagine that it becomes conscious of its etheric self first.
Okay.
After death.
And then what? I mean, we are experiencing ourselves as individuals, and we are experiencing ourselves ideally as an individuated soul. Now, if we were drones, of some kind of hive mind, that'd be different, right? We would not develop an identity. Everything that we experience would immediately being fed to, like, say, the Borg queen, the centralized hive mind. And if we die, well, then we're just gone. But the knowledge, the experience, the insights, all stored on this centralized computer. How do you think that works with us humans as human beings?
I think for this lifetime, it would be stored in the etheric self. And
that sounds a bit technical. I don't think that everybody can follow you here. Just as a warning, like maybe try to find words, like easier words. Okay, even if you have to like sort of form sentences around this. So like a container somehow, a spiritual container.
Yeah, outside of, spiritual container that is not 3D, that holds sentiments and the feelings and the experiences and the progress that you've made in this lifetime outside of yourself. And you would be
outside of the physical self. Outside of the physical self.
Yes, outside of the physical self. And you would die. The physical self dies, but your consciousness from your physical self, which is not made up of matter, it's not 3D, it would be aware of this container that holds all of your experiences, trials, tribulations, growth.
Okay.
That's how I would say.
Yeah, like can you guys all sort of see that? Or would you like to introduce a different way of imagining this? That we're doing scientific work here, guys. Okay, we're exchanging how we're seeing it. There's no good or bad or pro and con. you know, just freely exchanging.
So studying NDEs, you know, like near-death experiences, people report the awareness, the consciousness being super heightened.
Okay.
And
after they separate from their physical?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
But they're still tethered.
In the moment.
Yeah,
Okay.
in the moment. They're still tethered. So we don't obviously know what goes on beyond that.
Because it's just a near-death experience, yeah. So then they haven't died, so or maybe they were clinically dead.
Yes,
for
exactly.
A second, but this hasn't the container as Jared called it hasn't separated yet, so it was still connected somehow. Okay,
but
so what you're saying
are not in a physical body. They're not even in a container from at least the ones that I've read about, or they're just awareness. They have like 360-degree vision, quote unquote, and making the choice to either move on to whatever that move on is, or, you know, come back to the body, which all of the near-death experiences have obviously come back. But just this super aware state of consciousness, not contained in matter.
Very nice, very cool contribution, Cindy. Thank you for sharing your research. So your research of near-death experiences shows, just in slightly different words, but rather similar to actually what Jared said. Yeah, so those are people that almost died, and they have already separated from the physical, but not entirely. So there's some kind of process here that occurs. So fully dead people, yeah, where that separation proceeds all the way through, and something else that we don't know yet happens. They typically they can't write books. Okay, they can't materialize anymore. But what happens then? Let's investigate this. What happens then, even if you just answer this from, you know, sort of the images in your head or some inner knowing? Trust in your connection to the spiritual realms, guys. You all carry this in you. You all went through this many times. It doesn't have to sound scientific. There's an inner knowing in you. So what happens? Let's just go there. That's spiritual work, guys. Let's go there. It's essential for understanding life. Yeah? What happens after life gives life a meaning, doesn't it? It puts life into perspective and can maybe answer all these questions that we have.
Yeah, and right. I used to think that when you died, like when I was younger, I used to think that you died. When you died, you were met by, you know, your relatives, your ancestors, or whatever, and then the angels would come in, and then they would take you back to wherever it was you came from. That's what the simplistic view that I had.
It is simplistic, but it is still based on an inner knowing. You go back to where you came from.
Yes, it kind of feels right.
Feels right. But then we need to go a step further. Well, where did we come from?
Yeah,
right?
It doesn't feel very. It's not very well discriminated, but it feels accurate.
But it's great. Yeah, that's exactly what that inner knowing sounds like. Yeah, be okay with just saying it how it feels like. We don't know that for sure yet, but it feels right. That there's some kind of, I don't know, something like a committee or something. Yeah, supporters. Or at least that's what we want to believe. They help us in the process. So what is the process? Let's feel into this. We don't have any scientific proof in the sense of nature science. Okay, we don't have that. So don't be afraid of saying anything wrong. There is no wrong. Like, just tap into what it feels like. We can do an historical investigation, and that's usually what you do when you don't have any answers. You go into history and, you know, study all the spiritual teachings about the afterlife, you know, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the book of Thoth's Book of the Dead, and, you know, like the Persians, all main spiritual streams or traditions have an in-depth investigation of what happens in the afterlife, what happens in the moment of death, and continuing.
Could it
Has
be, sorry.
Has anybody read any of these? I mean, studied any of this? Like, investigated, like Cindy has researched about near-death experiences? It's fine. I'm just asking. But go ahead with what you feel, Sean.
Well, I would hope that there'd be kind of this, not all knowing, but this more knowingness, non-amnesia that we have here, quote unquote, and that we would have total awareness of what was, is, and, you know, instead of these steps that we have to go through here in the 3D mortal realm, and that we'd have a review of things, not like a judgment day, but just a review of things and events and traumas and how, you know, what I learned and got out of it on a spiritual sense and not a 3D sense.
Yeah, sort of the essence, right? The essence of this lifetime that needs to be extracted somehow.
Yeah.
I like how you
relate
review.
Sorry, how it links to my ancestry line and the future lines as well. I find it quite beautiful in that way that I described.
Yeah, so investigating that and going into like the teachings of the ancestors and all that, you know, the old ancient teachings can greatly help us. Okay, because I mean, we're not the first ones thinking about this. Okay, this is nowhere near new. That kind of thought, or that kind of question, where do we go? What happens with our consciousness? I mean, think about it. You know, the Egyptians, they spent their entire life preparing for the afterlife.
That would be tiring.
Oh, and even, you know, in medieval times and so forth. I mean, this is not, guys, this is not new. This is the question of all questions, the mother of all questions. Once you've accepted that you're a soul, a spirit being that is having a physical experience, you have to start investigating these kind of things. Now, I'm not saying that you have to dedicate the rest of your life in reading, you know, all these different religious views on that, you know, but start with one. Start with one. Yeah, and then just feel in what feels right, what doesn't feel right. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church portrays a picture in a way that you meet your creator. Yeah, so somehow you have like these white robes on, and then you stand in front of God, and then is, I think you said, Judgment Day, right? So you're being judged, and there's some kind of pathway then, right? You either go up into heaven or down into hell, right? Isn't that the way Western spirituality
Yeah, the
tradition
storytelling of it.
portrays?
Yeah.
Very similar to the Egyptian, very similar to the Greco-Latin. Yeah, you sort of cross some kind of barrier, the river Styx or whatever, you know, you step into the underworld, and there is some kind of weighing of things. There's some kind of process, yeah, that kind of decides where it goes from there. right? There's a new sort of map there. There's a new realm there.
It's interesting that you say that, Jona, because I've been quite obsessed. Well, I was obsessed with scales when I was very young. I would just look at them and wonder what it was all about. And
Right. Yeah.
just,
Don't just refer to yourself right now.
yeah,
Just feel into it. Okay.
okay.
If you think about all of you guys, if you think about what our fears are when it comes to death, all right, what comes up first for you?
Pain and loss.
All right. Well, who experiences the pain and loss?
Well, it
Whose
could
perspective
be
is that?
other
People,
family members.
Yes. Okay. So the people left behind. Okay. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Do you think that you, as this, you know, we called it container earlier, but something like the consciousness of you, they're contained in something that we don't know yet. That experiences pain and loss? Do you think that you have emotions per se?
My human self would, but not my consciousness, I don't think.
Probably not. No. I mean, we're expanding our spiritual organs here. Yeah, we're stretching a little bit. We don't know this for sure, but if you really feel into it, the moment we're out of our physical and out of our ego, do we still experience something like emotions, pain, love, and romantic love, and these kind of things, separation, belonging? Do we still feel that?
I wouldn't think so, because they're all connected to your body mind, which is connected to the
Mm-hmm.
electricity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good thinking, Jared. At least not in the same way. Okay. Maybe we still remember it because it was just a minute ago that we felt it. You know what I mean? I don't know. Yeah. Let's just stretch this a little bit here. Yeah. And think a little farther than we normally think, because normally we stop right there. We stop at the moment we die. And most people can actually not even think that far. They're so afraid of the dying process that they can't think as far as death. Surveys have shown that people aren't actually that afraid of death. They're afraid of dying. There's also a big distinction to make.
Yep.
Yeah? Because the dying process, we still experience that with our ego. Yeah?
Correct.
The pain and the fear and the agony of dying. At least that's what we're afraid of. Okay, death is not normally something that people are so afraid of. So if you ask people, oh, no, I'm not afraid of death. No, but they're afraid of dying. They spend a great deal of their lifetime thinking about dying, or better say, not dying.
Yes, that's a big one, Jona.
The whole anti-aging movement is all about dragging out the dying process. Yeah, and dying as painless as possible. But that on a side note. Just take a mental note here that the biggest fear of people is dying. And then some people, depending on what kind of spiritual teaching, dogma, belief they were raised in, or that they subscribe to, some people are afraid of death. What part in them do you think makes them afraid of death?
ego.
No, let's be a little more precise here. Okay, there's people who only believe in the physical material, who don't believe that there is a soul, that there's a something spiritual. They are, of course, afraid of death because they're completely 100% tethered to their physical experience. They don't believe that there's a life after, and therefore, you know, they're afraid of not existing anymore. And this is a pretty big fear. Yeah, this idea that or what can be triggered when you think this thought that one day you might not exist anymore. But somebody with a spiritual belief or understanding does not believe that they don't exist anymore, even if you've never consciously thought that thought. But you know, like most of us here believe that there is an afterlife somehow. Okay, so we just change form. Yeah, we transform. And we've already gone as far as like, okay, with all the experiences, all the sentiments, all the insights, all that we have gained, yeah, in our conscious life, yeah, culminated as our consciousness, somehow moves on. So we don't believe that we cease to exist. We make this distinction. We say our body ceases to exist, but our consciousness continues to live. Now let's take that a step further. How does this go in the cosmos, or how does this go in nature? Yeah, as above, so below. Let's just learn from, you know, other processes. How does this normally go? So let's stick with the plant here for a second. The plant, let's take a sunflower. Now, lives a glorious life as a beautiful sunflower. And then to the end of its life, it forms all these seeds. And the actual plant begins to die, yeah, until it, you know, completely dies, you know, falls to the ground, decays, and decomposes. What is the decomposition? What happens there? Do we have any biologists here or botanists? I mean, the same happens with the animal body or the human body. It's that in-between state, right? Everything that the plant, the entire plant material that the plant consisted of, yeah, transforms in the decomposition phase. Yeah, it rots. And then there's tons of organisms called decomposers that help with that kind of splitting up the plant materials, the leftover corpse, so to speak, into its components, carbon, all sorts of minerals, all sorts of molecules that go back into the earth, right? They deliver food for other organisms and therefore transform, yeah, through something that we can call metabolic process. The leftover corpse, the leftover material, physical material, gets decomposed, gets metabolized. That's how this works. Even stars, even, you know, bigger systems and even smaller systems like germs, viruses, and so forth. Yeah, so after the physical death, yeah, the leftover material, the atoms and stuff, they get metabolized and fed back into the system. Now that's why we recycle. That's why we have composts. Yeah, because here we collect all the dead material, let it rot, add some decomposers so it goes a little faster, and then we have beautiful food, beautiful fertilizer for the next generation of sunflowers to grow, right? The same happens with us. Our physical body decomposes, so we know that. We don't have to go further into this or be graphic about it. But the same process also occurs with parts of our consciousness. As a matter of fact, that's how evolution works. A part of this knowledge and the insights and, you know, the progression that we've made kind of goes back into something like a collective consciousness and then inherits to the next generations, not just through our own genetic lineage. It happens epigenetically. Yeah, so if you look at our societies today, yeah, we learn to read and write latest by like 6 or 7 years old. We can all read and write. That's an accomplishment of our intellect as a whole race. If you would have taught the early Homo sapiens how to read and write, it wouldn't have worked. They didn't have the intellectual capacity. They didn't have the container for that. You know, they were all just, you know, instincts and biology. This had to be developed over thousands and thousands, if not millions of years. So first our physical developed, then our feeling, yeah, that we start sort of feeling what we're experiencing and also start, like, you know, wondering about other people's feelings, yeah, our feelings. So then our intellect, yeah, our intellectual capacity had to develop, yeah, over the thousands, 100,000s of generations. So that children nowadays, by the age of 6, can read and write. Do you have any idea what an evolutionary accomplishment that is from an intellectual standpoint? It's amazing. Now, spiritually, you've heard me say this many times, we're still sort of in our infancy. What happened here? Let me ask you a question. Do you think that people in the old days, like say 5,000 years ago, or 8,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, were more or less spiritual than us? What do you think?
That's a really good question, and I've often thought about that, and I still don't know. I think that individually, I think that there were some people who were more spiritual than what we would consider ourselves to be today. But collectively, actually, no, I'm not. So I'm not even 100% sure. I'm really not, but I have thought about this a lot.
That's a really cool question. You know, because now you're zooming into the bigger process. What is all this progression and evolution even about? Where does this go? Where does this end? What's it for? So since we're looking at spirituality here and not, like, say, the accomplishments of the human physical organism, which biology is pretty clear on, that is sort of the apex of physical development. The human body is the most complex living organism on this planet. Okay, so that's done. Feeling wise, we've evolved from, you know, just dog eats dog and, you know, trying to survive and killing others and stealing food and stuff like that. That is instinct-driven animalistic behavior, to developing something like a conscience, to developing social rules, laws, that allow us, to protect our feelings, also our life and some of the safety aspects of that. But that's all like in the feeling of things. Yeah. Even to a certain degree, the onset of morality. Yeah, what is right and what is wrong. And then we have developed our intellectual capacity. A big step in our intellectual capacity as humanity started in the 15th, 16th century, when we basically adopted the heliocentric model, which is, accepting that the sun is at the center of the solar system and not the earth. And when the Catholic Church sent out scientists to investigate how the world works, how nature works, to describe the mechanisms. That was like a bit over 500 years ago. Okay, and here we are now. Okay, and we benefit from all our ancestral processes. So them going through the development of the physical body, the emotional body, the mental body. Yeah, here we are now. And now we're asking ourselves, we know that the spiritual impulse was always there for as long as humans existed. How do we know this? Cave paintings and stuff like that. We know that people, in the moment consciousness was there is the moment when, some kind of concept of higher power was expressed in ancient civilizations. Okay, so we know that the spiritual impulse was there, but were they actually more spiritual than we are today? And you said something very important here, Jared. You said maybe individuals, so as an exception, yeah, like avatars, yeah, people that sort of stuck out. But as a whole, as a race, if you will, as a species, maybe not so much. How do we know this? Well, throughout the centuries and the millennia, you can tell if you do a little bit of history examination that the prevalent beliefs at a certain time, not only did they last very long, but they were also sort of dogmatic. Yeah, people didn't really question them. They somehow had a connection with, some kind of spiritual understanding, and then maybe some priests or whatever, that served as mediators. Yeah, so all the way to, I'd say to 2,000 years ago, the only way to speak to God or the gods was through mediators. Can you follow me? Yeah, you had to talk to the high priest or to the druid or the shaman, or yeah. So you had, and every tribe, every family, or the little mini collective had their own sort of mediator. So spirituality played a big role in ancient life, but it wasn't really executed through the individual. It was more executed as a collective, under the guidance of like sort of one monk or one priest or one shaman or one druid or whatever, or a group of those. But this changed about 2,000 years ago. Does anybody know what changed?
Christ consciousness, Jesus Christ.
All right, so Christ consciousness, Jesus Christ, two different things. Okay, So the arrival of Christ consciousness, a certain type of consciousness, it's sort of a skip, a quantum leap in consciousness. We call this Christ consciousness. Why we call this Christ consciousness? Well, because it happened around that time, yeah, historically, at least from what we know. But it also is represented through one particular avatar. That one particular avatar, yeah, like spiritual teacher, whatever, spread a new message, a New Testament. What is that new message? Does anybody here know, without running into their religious trauma? What was Jesus Christ's message?
Can I have a stab, being a Jewish boy? Equality, that we were all equal and one.
That's a big one, and thank you very much for overcoming your ancestral
I did it.
resistance.
Thank you.
Okay, because this was new, guys, at the time. Okay, because Jesus Christ's teachings were for everyone, not just for the fidels, not just for the ones that had subscribed themselves to a certain belief. Jesus Christ's teachings were addressed to every single human, including the poor, including the dirty, including the criminals, including the Gentiles,
The
yeah,
sick,
the
yeah,
sick, whatnot,
and the gays.
and the gays, and women, for that matter. Okay, so this was new. This was a big one, and there was something else. And that's actually the core of Christ consciousness, and that's why this is so important to understand the concept of Christ consciousness, what it even means. It doesn't mean that you have to be a Christian. On the contrary, I just said it's not bound to your belief. The message, the New Testament was, everybody can connect with God from within. From within themselves, they don't need a mediator. Well, that was quite a revolutionary message. Not well received at the time. Okay, regardless, this is just hearsay. We don't know if Jesus Christ was actually a historical figure or not. But if we focus on the teaching itself, everybody can connect with God directly from within themselves, from within their own spiritual authority. That's huge. That was a huge step in the spiritual evolution of humankind. Why? Because up until then, people's own experience of spirituality was externalized. And we can discuss whether that was done on purpose and dogma and, all the, but I don't even want to go there. That's not important. Okay, a civilization always, adopts new concepts, new strategies when they're more beneficial, when they're advantageous for evolution. And so 1,000 years ago, something started to happen, yeah, in all humanity. Now, Buddhism has very similar aspects, but Buddhism was, basically propagated, 1,000 years prior to that, and there was different aspects to that. It was about the liberation from the emotional struggle, from the suffering. It had to do with transcending our feeling soul. Whereas the Hindu tradition, for example, was geared to transcending the physical experience at the time, not even longer ago, like 7,000, 8,000 years ago. It was about transcending the physical. So the teachings that come from the Vedic Hindu traditions, from the Eastern traditions, are all geared and derive around transcending the physical. elevating one's consciousness above the physical. The Buddhic traditions are geared, and this is based on, the historical context, based on transcending the emotional resistance toward the physical experience. Those are all very good traditions, very good teachings, but we're in a different time now, we're in a different era now. We've been told, you guys can all have your own spiritual self, your own spiritual I, your own spiritual identity. You don't need priests or shamans or whatever, need as, the only way, mediators. No, and then if you go a little bit deeper into like Christian esoterics, Christ also sent a message, you can get there through the way I am living this here. This is the instruction manual. This is how you do this. The pathway is your sacred heart. It's your compassion, your empathy, and your willingness to understand one another, your willingness to serve one another, your willingness to work together. That is the pathway. And the organ needed to be nourished, to be developed, to be educated for this is your sacred heart. That's a big deal, guys. So, Jared, I agree with you that people weren't actually more spiritual than us. Spirituality played a bigger role. It actually had the purpose to define, like sort of social rules. Yeah. So, even the Ten Commandments, the Old Testament, which was written before Christ, okay, refers to, the ways, the traditions of how you have to live in order to connect with God. This is no longer needed. Why? Because we have basically osmotically absorbed all that already, and we know that, yes, of course, it's not right to kill and to steal and to rape. Of course. Why not? Because it doesn't feel good. It makes us feel bad. Yeah, we have something like not just a conscience, we have something like a consciousness that informs us that it's not right to do that. And on the other hand, we feel elated. We feel liberated. We feel like we belong. We feel fulfilled when we engage in things that propagate, togetherness and expressions of love and beauty. Nobody has to tell you or teach you this. Yeah, that a beautifully prepared meal shared with other people is a highly spiritual expression coming from your heart. So, guys, all the struggle that you have with your own spirituality is actually kind of just unreflected, because all your values that you have, your spiritual values, they aren't new. That's part of you. That's who you are. Now, that's just like the ability to read and write and have all these sort of logical and rational thinking processes that we have right now. That's an accomplishment of the evolution of humankind. You did not do this evolution in your lifetime. This all happened through hundreds of thousands of generations before you. And so your capacity to develop these faculties was sort of preempted, predisposed. And now if we talk about spirituality, so we've reached the peak of intellectualism, Yeah, we're at a point right now where we can basically prove everything with logic, everything, even the untrue things, which shows us that, okay, it's not enough. It's not enough to just, revert or rely on our rationalism, because there's an error built in our ego thinking, in our intellect, and that is perception. Now, everything we perceive is real, but just because it's real doesn't mean it's true. All right? There is a faculty that's missing, and that is the ability to discern truth, to feel truth with all your being. And this being in you is a living being, just like, every organism. This being, this spirit being in you, needs to be nourished, needs to be fed, needs to be exercised, needs to be applied to grow, to verify, to refine, to mature. And guess what? With every spiritual conversation that you have, with every meditation, with every conversation that you have with your higher self, with you connecting with your true self, etc., you are feeding your spiritual organs. You're refining them, you're working on them. That's a lengthy process. Yeah, and strictly spoken, we're just still talking about preparing yourself for becoming able to navigate these realms, these spiritual realms. Because what you are about to uncover, or discover, better say, when you dip your toes into the spiritual realm, can be quite surprising. Just a few pictures here. Who of you would like to share some of your early spiritual experiences, delving into the spiritual realms without preparation?
I can give you just a brief overview. I was able to see darkness at a very early age, almost like movies in my head.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I had to separate myself from to be able to cope and live. But I
What do you mean
thought
separate yourself from? What do you mean with that?
I shut it down.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
all that was traumatizing, and um, I thought it was me because it was something that I could see within me.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that was
Mm-hmm.
pretty traumatizing.
Mm-hmm. You weren't prepared.
Was not prepared in the slightest.
Mm-hmm. Any other experiences? Early spiritual experiences, diving into the spiritual realm unprepared.
Yeah, similar to Cindy, for me, I came up against all sorts of darkness and all sorts of experiences having to fight, and yeah, just craziness. It literally kind of felt like Dante's Inferno, like, this spiral kind of down. Um,
No
and
bliss.
yeah,
No bliss.
no, there was nothing. There
Dang.
was no love, no love and light. I mean, every now and then you kind of get the sense that some kind of higher power and angels kind of pulled you out of something, But
Mm-hmm.
aside from that, it was a very difficult, very long and difficult process, but one I wouldn't change. I wouldn't change it for a second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's something there, and I talked about sort of something like a natural barrier earlier, you know, that prevents us from going in there unprepared. Because if we do, then that's what we experience. Yeah, and this is also has been used, for various from various religious dogmas. To think about it, this whole concept of sin and hell and judgment day and you're going to go to hell. I mean, these things have been programmed into us for many, many thousand years.
Well, I wanted to add into that also. I would see beautiful beings as well, but I had no idea what they were. And I remember asking my mom at a really young age what these were, and she would just tell me, "Oh, you're just dreaming. They're not real." So I never gave it any credit or any thought. Plus, I just didn't understand it, so I sort of wrote it off.
Yeah, we had no roadmap for this. We didn't know what we're saying, but we still don't. What these beings are, what their purpose is, why they're there, why we can see them or feel them. It's a big unknown. Scary as hell. All right, so how do we overcome this? We want to build a bridge between the material and the spiritual. Okay, of course we can do it like Cindy's mom. We can say, oh, that's all not real. You're just making this up. That's, just a dream. Yeah, so neurons wildly firing, recycling some of the short and long-term memory of the day. Of course we can say that. But I suppose that many of you here have already experienced more than that. You have engaged in practices such as meditation, maybe lucid dreaming, contemplation, prayer, in which you indeed felt the presence of something. Give me a raise of your hands if you can, even though you may not be able to put a label on it or, fully sort of navigate or whatever. But if you feel the presence of other spirit beings, when you dream, when you meditate, the moment you fall asleep, when you pray. Yeah, so the moment you accept that you are a spirit being that lives in the body, yeah, sort of a life-giving spirit, yeah, that has this physical experience, that uses some kind of physical vehicle. Okay, in that moment, you also need to admit that there must be more spiritual beings. At least, yours and yours and yours and yours and yours and yours, right? You guys all believe that you are a soul, which is fundamentally a spirit being, okay, that exists outside of your physical being. And so do I. And that means that somewhere there's got to be a place where all these spirit beings are, right? Call this the spiritual realm or the spiritual sphere. So what we don't know, and this is part of spiritual education that is really needed, this sort of systematic investigation, is that there's different levels, there's different spheres, there's different hierarchies there. Okay, the easiest distinction, and I did this in part one already, just a little bit, is the distinction between, let's say everything that's material, everything that is here in this 3D earthly realm, we call this earthly experience, earthly being. Yeah, everything that is in sort of the heavens, if you will, yeah, that represent somehow the light beings, yeah, the higher beings that pull us, sort of, that support us, that assist us, that empower us to continue to strive for our higher self, yeah, the supernatural. And then there's something like what we could call, the underworld, the subnatural, yeah, where all the ghouls and the ghosts and the demons and whatnot reside. What you see here, these pictures are all different depictions of Dante's Inferno, hell worlds, okay? Hell worlds. So if we go back to this, sort of archaic understanding of as above, so below, here, just a few pictures, mostly Tree of Life pictures. You can see that there's a theme that runs through our histories. There's a world above here, there's the center, no? The earthly realm here. The realm above, yeah, the supernatural, and the realm below. And somehow, they often look like mirrors or shadow versions of each self. Yeah, here, very nicely depicted here. And if you think about it, something like the yin yang symbol and stuff like that also has elements of that. The black and the white, the dark and the light. Yeah, so somehow they're conjoined in the middle. Somehow the earthly life has a significance, is relevant for these realms. I mean, why else would your spirit being decide to leave, sort of the fluffy warmth of eternity, not having to deal with emotions, with a nervous system, with a decaying body and fear of mortality and stuff like that. Why would our soul, our spirit being leave that in order to have a physical experience where it not only has to experience the amnesia that you mentioned, forget all about its true being, its true nature, but also go through like pretty rough adversities, struggle, pain, loss, guilt, shame, anger. So there's something about the earthly, where the subnatural and the supernatural, the underworld and the heavens, or heaven and hell, where they meet. Okay, so we're not seeing spirit beings from the supernatural or spirit beings from the subnatural walking on earth. Now, this may have been different in ancient times. All right, so if you look at ancient texts, including the Bible, it was quite common for people to see angels, to speak to them, to have conversations with them. And the way this is described is often like you don't even know if it actually happened or if they're just making this up. So maybe it was like that. Maybe it was a little different, the terrain, the condition here on this planet. But right now, we're not seeing any of these spirit beings walking around, and yet we can feel their presence within us. Raise your hand if you can feel the presence of light beings, something like God, Jesus, angels, spirit guides, guardian angels, but also dark entities, dark beings, feeling the presence of, not necessarily seeing or anything, but both. Yes, and that's pretty common. That's part of, not the cause, but part of this duality that we experience. We feel it both. We feel it both at the same time. And not only that, we feel our immortal spirit being, our soul, while we also have to feel our ego self, yeah, with the fear of death and all that. We have to experience both. What do you think the purpose of that could be?
To keep us in balance, Jona?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say right or wrong here, but balance, I mean, yeah, to maybe learn balance.
Yeah.
I mean, we were balanced when we were part of the supernatural, right? We were balanced. So why
Yeah.
would we leave that if we have to be kept in balance? It's more like maybe how to learn how to do this ourselves.
Yes. That was what I was actually wanting
Does that
to
feel
incur.
okay?
That feels spot on.
What else? How would you say this, or how do you feel this? Guys, share. What could the purpose be of having experience? I know your earthly limitation along with your supernatural being, and also feeling the presence of all the darkness in this world.
My first impression would be to learn how to navigate through it, but I don't think that that's quite an accurate description. But maybe
No, the first
I think
impression
maybe
is always the most intuitive, the most
mm,
natural. And to
but to
navigate.
experience both maybe and then make a higher choice
Yeah.
instead of making lower choices and staying in a lower state and continuously going through the same thing, which only perpetuates things that we don't necessarily need. It's like that thing that you say, you put your hand on the hot stove. How many times do you need to do that before you've learned that that's not feasible,
So some kind of learning experience we called a training camp last time, right? So
Yeah.
somehow the planet Earth or the earthly experience is some kind of training course, some kind of training camp. For what?
To express it in a practical way and not in a way that's convoluted or.
No, on the soul level, we're not convoluted.
Oh, yeah.
So
Okay, yeah, sorry.
yeah, no, you have to be very precise here in your thinking. Okay. So the question was, why would we leave that supernatural state to experience this earthly experience where we have to go through the duality? What could the purpose of that be? And you said something important, Sean. You said maybe to learn to navigate all this and make a more conscious choice.
Yeah.
All right. To me, that sounds like our souls somehow exist in the supernatural, a part of light. Maybe that's just the nature of, how light works. Yeah, that it brings something into existence in the light, but then it has to go through some kind of refinement process. You get that for free, your existence as a soul being. But then you have to continue growing, just like how you are born for free. You didn't have to do anything to get born. But then you got to do the work, right? You got to go through childhood and puberty and adolescence. You have to go through a maturity process, and there's a bunch of choices that you make that basically determine the kind of human that you become. What if it's the same way with our soul? What if you have to come into this physical experience, to learn how to navigate the spiritual realm, like a driver's license, maybe over the course of 10,000 lifetimes, 10,000 lessons, until you are prepared to make a conscious choice. A conscious choice as to what you want to tether yourself to, as to what you want to subscribe to. Whether you want to subscribe to the supernatural, to the forces of light, or the subnatural, the forces of dark. So with this process, with this sort of thought process and feeling process, I would like to leave you here at the end of part 2 and ask you to ponder about this a bit more. This collecting experiences, going through the struggles, the physical struggles, the emotional struggles, the mental struggles, and also, for many of you, the spiritual struggles, as part of a greater plan, as part of your, well, basically evolutionary path as an individuated soul. So if you want to become your own spiritual identity with your own spiritual authority, then you have to make a driver's license. You have to be able to navigate these realms first within yourself, and then in the spiritual realm. When you contemplate that, maybe think about how the confrontation with, all these earthly experiences has shaped your perspective on life, your perspective on existence, your perspective on the universe. Just know that, when you understand your earthly life as a training course, that this is obviously not just about, unicorns and waterfalls. It is also about learning about all the things, the adversities that can hold you back from tethering yourself to the light. Because if you think about it, in your earthly life, the things that you constantly complain about are these experiences, these hell world experiences, these shadow aspects of your earthly life. So this is what you experience as struggle. And don't mind the words here that Dante's Inferno was, based on the 7 deadly sins and so forth. But if you look behind the words, you can feel, which aspects of the lower human nature are associated with it. Libido, that's the biological urge, the instinct, the pleasure-driven behavior. Lucifer, the Luciferic aspect of our shadow is the aspect of seeking a better world, escaping, escapism, checking out, trying to get find the shortcut. The gluttons, the gluttony, is basically the materialism, just sort of gathering as much, hoarding, as much material treasures or whatever. Consumerism, just consuming things, not contributing, just consuming. To a point of self-destruction. Greediness, as sort of the aspect of the human nature behind, deception and selfishness, wrathful, wrath, the aspect of the human nature that links you into anger and injustice and unfairness and victimhood. Heretics, that links you into the aspect of human nature that we associate with specialness, superiorism, and being fake, being phony, hypocrite, violence, obviously links you to the part in you, that wants destruction, that can get so wound up that you no longer care for life or for existence. And then the fraudulent nature of our human impulses that has to do with trickery and deception, manipulation, control. So look behind these words. Yeah, they're like 500 years old. So, well, not quite 200. But leaning toward the seven deadly sins from the Old Testament. So understand that those are just placeholders or representations of the what is considered sort of the dark aspects, the dark forces that work through us. So whenever we, get dominated by these kind of aspects in our lives, we are aligning ourselves to the underworld. The aspects of heaven, the aspects of the supernatural, are obvious, all the things that we strive for, the higher values that we have: love, truth, freedom, collaboration, abundance, healing. Yeah, you're familiar with all of those. So I want to leave you here with this contemplation. Why our soul has to go through this training camp and what the purpose of all this is. Because without contemplating that, it's very difficult for us to make out something like a purpose or meaning of an earthly life. And definitely not possible for us to understand what this whole process is that happens after we leave this physical life, and how all the things, the sentiments, the thoughts, the actions, the deeds, how they are being metabolized, how they are being used for the spirit realm, for our own soul, but also perhaps for the spirit beings that support us. There's something like that we often don't consider, all right, because part of our spiritual impulse, part of our desire to align ourselves to the divine, to the supernatural, the higher worlds, is collaboration and unity. So there's more than just our own soul's development, perhaps. Because as above, so below, right? As below, so above. So maybe, this whole sort of circle of life, happens in a way that we cannot imagine because of this amnesia, because we don't really know how the spirit realm is structured, what the consequences are of having this earthly experience, what the consequences are of us tethering ourselves to, or aligning ourselves to our higher self, to our, to the light forces in us, or tethering ourselves consciously or unconsciously, to the lower aspects of this earthly experience, the underworld. And we don't know what the consequences are until we investigate this. So before we can answer, what is good and what is bad and what helps us to evolve and what doesn't, we first need to really feel this through for ourselves. What could the purpose be from a soul's perspective to go through this earthly experience? What is the goal of it all? And we already have a few theories here, to learn how to navigate and to learn how to discern. And then I've added discern as in making better choices, and I've added a third aspect, and that is to consciously choosing what we're aligning ourselves to. Picking a team, if you will. And then with that, also sort of what happens after, enough experiences are gathered. If there's something like an ascension, if there's something that continues to evolve, that continues to go on. When does it end? How often do we have to do this? Right? Many of you ponder about this. So let's discuss this in part 3. How this whole evolutionary path of our soul could look like. And perhaps also bring in some of the esoteric frameworks that might help us to understand these things a little better, to investigate them, to study them. Personally, if you are a student of mine or coaching client of mine, I recommend the framework of anthroposophy from Rudolf Steiner as a representation of Western spirituality. Why do I recommend? Most of you here are of Western descent, to study Western spirituality rather than Eastern spirituality, even though it's so popular nowadays, but in my view, not appropriate, because they were developed at a time where the goal of the human evolution at the time was a different one than it is right now. We're in the era of the consciousness soul. We're supposed to learn to form our own spiritual identity, our I am awareness, through our sacred heart. Basically, what we've been told, the message that we've gotten was, or the task that we've gotten through Christ consciousness, through the Christ impulse, was to develop our own spiritual identity. And therefore, you will find it easier to connect with words and teachings that sort of speak a language that is still sort of in you in form of images and so forth. So Western spirituality, for example, talks about angels. This is something that most of you can connect with. Angels as representations of the spirits of the supernatural, the higher worlds. And then fallen angels as the representations of the underworld. Those are things that you can instinctively or intuitively connect with because of your heritage. That's why I recommend anthroposophy, because it puts it together quite nicely and is based on Rudolf Steiner's study of the Hindu and the Buddhic and the Babylonian teaching. So you get a big package there, a package that is so big that you probably don't know where to start. So there's a book that Steiner wrote 100 years ago, Obtaining Knowledge of the Higher Worlds. It's very difficult to read. I suggest that you check out the YouTube channel called Rudolf Steiner Press. There you'll find most of his books and many of his lectures in audio form, and it's a lot easier to study Rudolf Steiner in audio. But all of Rudolf Steiner's material is public domain. All right, so there's no agenda or anything behind that, so you can literally look up every single word that Rudolf Steiner has written in the Rudolf Steiner archive.org and search for keywords and so forth. It was all written in German originally. Most of his work was lectures. Yeah, so that is a framework that I recommend to all of you who are wanting to dive into the intellectual study and form a framework that allows you to investigate those spiritual aspects without dogma, without any kind of preoccupation other than the assumption that we are a spirit being. So as soon as you subscribe to I am a soul with a body, I am a spirit being, all right, then the anthroposophical teachings can help you sort this. And just so you know, this is a project that I'm planning right now, a anthroposophy study group, all right, where we go through some of these lectures and frameworks in detail and discuss, the deeper esoteric principles and meanings behind this. So this will be available to members only, members of the Sacred Self-Healing community. All right, guys, so we're going to see each other again in like 4 weeks, roughly, for part 3 of this advanced spiritual contemplation. And next week, we're going to go back to the issues with spiritual awakening, where we go through the process from the perspective of the inner experience, where we can share some of our experiences and the problems and the advancements and insights and so forth based on our spiritual experience. Here in this etherization or electrification and etherization series, I want to really dive into this deeper discussion with you, to stretch, to expand, to grow your spiritual organs. Thank you very much for sharing and for contributing. It's a pleasure. I love your questions and your answers.
Thank you so much, Jona. That was awesome. That was really, really good and extremely thought-provoking. Thank you for taking so much time. That's awesome.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Jona.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, everybody else. I see your chats, and please continue asking questions, all right? Send in questions. This is the place where we can discuss these deeper aspects. There is no right or wrong, guys. We are doing spiritual investigation in real time here. Okay. I'm looking forward to part 3 and see you then.